Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, Photographing Bear Behavior, Part 1, The Quest for Food, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Brad Josephs. It's a pleasure as always, Brad. I'm going to hand things off to you.
Hey, thank you guys. I really appreciate people signing up and watching. It's a very distracting time in the world, so there's one way to ground ourselves, and that's to focus on the good things and nature. So we're going to do bears today. Now, bears is such a huge, Court did a fantastic webinar on bear photography of the world. So I kind of wanted to deviate off that a little bit, but bears is such a gigantic subject that I wanted to really kind of start narrowing it down and maybe even do a series. So hopefully this one goes well and you guys want me to do some more like this. So right now I'm just going to focus on photographing bear behavior. And there's so many aspects of bear behavior. Next week, I'm going to do how to properly photograph mothers and cubs to get, pictures images that are really awesome. Well, today I think it's just going to be what really symbolizes bears so much is the quest for food. And the quest for food for bears is so intense, even compared to any other animals, because they're basically their niche, their specialty in life is to use their tremendous senses, their intelligence, their sense of smell, their hearing, their vision, which they're very good, their power, their tenacity, in order to locate high quality food sources, high calorie, things like that we would eat, as opposed to say cattle that can just graze on grass. And so these high quality food sources, and maximize them, eat it quickly, store away a bunch of fat, and be able to live on that fat during periods where there's no food. So in certain ecosystems, it's really a very, very successful, ingenious, strategy. So, and I think that the most of what this webinar is going to be are the Alaska brown bears, because I think this infusion of nutrients from the marine ecosystem, just for 3 or 4 months, mostly, allows them to sustain themselves, reproduce, make little baby bears, let them grow, and also be able to sit dormant in a den and live off those fat reserves. So I think we're kind of focused on that mostly. And so there's sort of stages, but I'm also going to do polar bears and pandas at the end. So there's stages of this hunt for food. And one of them, I think, and so you want to catalog, if you're going to go photograph bears and want to capture the whole story of this search for calories, there's certain stages involved in different phases. It's not just a bear with a salmon. I mean, and one of the things that I love about bears, there's so many, but it's how stoic and patient they are waiting. So you can have bears that haven't eaten anything substantial in 6 or 7 months, but they remain cool and calm, and they just know everything is going to work out. So this mother and cub just sitting out there, just staring at the water, just waiting. She knows it's going to happen. The cub's not really sure what's going on. She just wants to eat. But it's just this feeling that you get by watching these animals deal with uncertainty so well. And so that's something that I really like to capture, such as bear at sunrise, right before the sun comes up, staring in the water, waiting for the salmon. He knows he's going to get some, but they do it very patiently. Now, here's a little side note. So I'm going to just throw in all kinds of different things about pictures. And so this is the same picture, same image, but you'll notice that this is basically as I expose it normally for a sunrise, wanting to make sure I don't wash out the colors in the back. You see that the bear is about at least around 1/3 of the picture. So if I really exposed to get all the details of the bear in the image itself, I would blow the sky colors out. So this is a very common way to silhouette it out. And a lot of people are going to ask me, well, what kind of gear do you use? Well, about 2 years ago, I went ahead and did the big changeover from DSLR to the mirrorless system, and it was financially gigantic. But there's so many ways that it's just like an iPhone 1 versus an iPhone 12. And it's just that's the sort of technology. And one of the reasons I wanted to show you this picture is it allows you to get what's called a greater dynamic range. And so basically, you look like you think about a histogram where all the information's in there, from stuff that's underexposed to stuff that's overexposed. And basically, to me, it seems like it's just a bigger histogram, like there's more information. So you're able to, in post-processing, which I'll talk about in a little while, you're able to bring out information that normally in the old days would have been lost, such as, I mean, I basically just brightened the shadows up, but kept the blacks dark. So you just get the little bit of information that's hidden in that file. So it's kind of cool. Anyway, there's so much to talk about. But as far as behaviors go, this image tells me a big story about, but just because I know the bears very well. And you'll notice that bear's smelling the water. To me, that's really interesting, because what I've noticed is that when bears are fishing or waiting, they aren't going to spend their time waiting for salmon if the salmon aren't going to be there. And one way that they know is if salmon are upstream, and when the tide goes out, a lot of times they make a race back to the ocean because they're not ready to spawn yet. They'll smell the water. And if they smell fish upstream as that tide races out, they will hang on. And if they don't, then they'll move on. This is an image of just a bear waiting at a waterfall for salmon to move up. And the bear actually was very, very still, because it just didn't want to waste any energy. And the lighting was poor. In fact, we were getting ready to pack the group up. And then I just noticed, it hit me all of a sudden, wow, bears rarely just sit totally still, but this one's sitting still. So what we did is I encouraged everybody to slow the shutter speed way down to about 1/10 of a second. And that's about the right shutter speed in order to blur the water. And everything else that's not moving won't be blurred. And in this case, the bear. And actually, it's one of my favorite images I've ever taken. And I probably took it in about 2014. So just threw a tripod on, put it at 1/10 of a second. And yeah, so it's just kind of cool. So again, right now, the theme of the behavior that we're photographing is the hunt for the prey, the salmon. And so bears will often stand up, and they're just like a fly fisherman or other fisherman who understands how to read the water and look at the water. They could see fish in the water by looking at the waves or the ripples that fish might make as they're swimming. And they're so visual is how they hunt for salmon. And they often stand up so they can get a better look. And so if you can ever capture this moment, it's one of the things that humans are so drawn to bears, is that they have this ability to stand up like a person. And it's often postulated that that's one of the reasons why people love bears so much, because they can stand up like a person. Okay, so again, so they're hunting for food. But another aspect of bears is, especially in this coastal environment where there's a whole bunch of food in one area for a lot of different bears, well, that's going to, and the bears are desperate to eat, there's going to be a tremendous amount of competition. And what that allows us to see is one of the other aspects of why we think bears are so amazing is their power and their ferocity. So when two bears fight, it's the ultimate fight in nature. So always want to be ready for some of the ultimate images that you'll ever be able to get in nature, which are two bears at battle. And these are just a few of my favorites. Definitely want to look for a fast shutter speed to capture the action. Medium aperture, because you've got a whole bunch of bears, a lot of space in there that you want both bears to all be in focus. So your aperture, you're going to want to have that aperture number. Now, I'm going kind of advanced. I'm not on this presentation. I'm gonna, just speak to you guys as if you're already understand the basics of photography. On trips, on photo trips, good photo tour leaders will assess the level of each client, and some people want more advanced knowledge, and some people need some more basic stuff. So you kind of got to pick one, and I'm just picking more advanced for this one. So a fast shutter speed, again, is very, very important so that you can capture the power, the drops of water that are spraying out. And there's just really nothing in nature more awe-inspiring, more humbling than having two bears that could be 400 to even over 1,000 pounds going at it with a ferocity that, is strong as any animal in nature, and cat-like agility. This is one of my favorite sequences that I ever shot. We were actually walking with the group out to the river, but the salmon got stranded, and one of the bears saw it from 100 yards away and took off. And the salmon was swimming very close to where we were. So I had everybody sit down, and we didn't have much time to get our stuff out, which is a very important rule that I always preach, is if you're out in the area where there's animals, anything can happen at any second. And Mother Nature doesn't let you hit rewind and do it again. You have one chance. So always have your stuff ready to go, especially fast shutter speed type things. You wouldn't want to have your camera set up for slow exposure. You would have missed this whole sequence. So what happened is one bear caught it, another bear ran up, and then they had this standoff. And I just basically just put the hammer down and shot as many pictures as fast as a camera would allow, and was able to get these split-second motions of the fish getting dropped. The power, the facial expressions of these bears. And it was one of the most amazing opportunities, and it was just handed to us. Basically, the bears nature just put it in our lap, and the guys that were most ready and efficient with their gear were able to catch it. Yeah, there's a lot of anger, a lot of fury in these bears. Not towards us, we're not part of the system. We're just observers, and they understand that, and they don't bother us at all. But if you're another bear, you're competing for the food, and it's limited. So that was the bear that won. Poor guy. So okay, so so you got competition, you have the hunt for the salmon. So the other is the chase, and that's something very, very exciting to get. And again, it's one of the key things about capturing is using a fast frame rate. And that's why when you buy a camera, you want to see how many frames it shoots per second. Now, personally, I have a Sony A9, and at the time I bought it, it was the fastest camera in the world, I think. And it's been upgraded since then, but I mean, we're talking 25 frames per second. So I'm not going to miss anything. This is with my old cameras, which was Canon 7D, and I used to use a 70-200 or fixed 300 f4 lens. So just, but a fast frame rate. So even if you're shooting, a less, a more basic camera, it's basically on sports mode is what you're going to try to do. When you press that shutter down, it's just going to take one picture after the other as fast as it can. So the highest speed that you can, because this salmon appeared, even though I shot maybe 10 or 20 frames of this chase, I was able to get that fish in one or two of them because I was shooting continuously. And if you can get a bear chasing through the water with the splashes and everything, it's incredible. If you can actually get the salmon as well, you've got a real winner. In order to get these bears are running super fast, and to utilize the rule of thirds, so that whenever you're going to photograph an animal running, you always want more space in front where the bear is running. You want to see where the bear is going, not where the bear has been. So like if this bear was over here and his nose was running out of the frame, the picture would have been deleted that day for me. But luckily here, I had to control my focus point. So that is a very, very important. And for everybody's got a different camera. So whenever I'm doing photo talks like this for my group, I know that I'm still going to have to just tell everybody, don't worry, I'm going to see every one of your cameras and explain to you again what I was talking about, how to do it with your camera. But you need to be able to control your focus point and move it around. So I have my left thumb is dedicated to a toggle switch that I've set on my camera, which moves my focus point. So if the bear is running from right to left, I move that focus point over so that the bear is in the right-hand side of the frame, running into the rest of the frame, and especially important if there's something like a salmon in front of it. Controlling your focus point, vitally important. And then just capturing the water droplets. And a lot of that's about light angle. So, we're at dawn, sometimes being backlit or side lit can be can be really, really good. You get rim light, not only on the bear, but also in the water drops. So this is speed priority. Normally, when I'm teaching people how to manually use their camera, I always suggest that they start out using aperture priority, which is what I usually use for most of the time. AV, or aperture priority, and basically you set the aperture and you're able to control both your shutter speed and your depth of field. And the reason I want people to shoot that first is to get a really strong handle on how to use aperture. What is aperture, and every camera is different, and every lens is different with its aperture, and it's a kind of a complicated thing that you just have to practice with. But so I think once you master that, then you can go to other things. So if I'm just going to try to make sure that I'm going to get these super fast acting bears with water droplets, the most important thing in these images is to make sure that I have a fast enough shutter speed. So I often will switch it to speed priority and then make sure that my shutter speed's high up. Always have to use auto ISO because you don't want the camera to have to make too many decisions. You're making one decision and let the camera automatically do the other ones, and so it's going to basically adjust the ISO. So if it's in a bright part of the river, it'll use a lower ISO. If it goes into a darker part, it will boost the ISO automatically in order for you to make sure that your shutter speed is fast enough. So you can see my settings here. I wanted to make sure that the lighting was not good. It was very dark, but I was at a 1600th of a second. Then I know that that's going to capture the motion. So I'll let the camera go ahead and decide I need to boost that ISO up to 2500. Now, in the old days, before these really new camera systems like the mirrorless cameras I used to tell people by listening to professional photographers that auto ISO was not very good. It just was just off the mark. The computer in the camera couldn't process things fast enough, and you would just get these wide swings, and it would just swing way up. Well, now it's much better, and the fact that a 2500 ISO, if you'll notice, there's that what that does is I basically gather more light and per unit of time, so I can have a faster shutter speed per unit of time. Now, the downside of having the ISO go high is that you will get a degraded quality, such as mostly like what you call grain or noise. But like with my camera, they're at 2500 ISO is no problem. There's zero noise. My camera now, my old camera, I think it maxed out at 6500 ISO, my Canon 7D. My new camera now can shoot 200,000 ISO. So it's just about getting what you pay for and just upgrading your equipment, and you're able to do things that 5, 6, 7 years ago I would have thought were impossible. So when you're shooting action like this, you are going to be basically photographing stuff that you hope will come out. All you need to do is make sure your shutter speed's fast, make sure your focus point is on the bear's face, and you just put the hammer down and get as many images as you can, and you don't know what you got because this stuff is happening faster than you can process visually. You don't even see the salmon popping out of the water. So you just take the pictures and then hope the bear's in the frame and your focus point was right. And with newer cameras, the speed of your autofocus is going to be much, much, much better. Oh, I think I forgot something. Okay, yeah, this is a good example. I didn't know that salmon popped out of the water until I looked at my pictures later. Okay, the other thing that you need to be able to capture all the images with a bear running. Maybe that bear's running towards you. So, you're on high speed, your frame rate is on full. So you're shooting continuous high speed. So you take a lot of pictures in a unit of time without having to refocus. And what you need to also be on is continuous focus mode. And as long as your focus point is on the bear's face, it will automatically focus as that bear's moving one way or the other. So you're not having to refocus, because if you were, say, on one shot focus, by the time you refocused, that bear's already moved. And so that none of your pictures are really going to be well in focus. So you need to be continuous focus mode. And as that bear's running towards me, my focus point is right here on the eyes, and I put the hammer down, like I said, put the shutter down, and then you'll get, you know, the better your camera is, the more sophisticated, the faster it will focus towards a bear that's running at you at 20, 25, or 30 miles an hour. And then you can get these sequences. This is the same bear. So that's the shooting the action shots. And then hopefully the bear gets the fish. And you can get the next stage of capturing this salmon fishing bear behavior, which is a bear with the fish. And I really like to, I mean, even though some of these pictures can be gross, it is such an important part of the bear's biology. And it's such a miracle from the ocean that these salmon come up, and they're basically on kamikaze mission to get to the spawning grounds. And there's so many of them, and they're so nutritious that the bears are able to sustain themselves in high densities. So to me, this is such a beautiful thing. It's just like, oh, that bear is getting what it needs. And I love, you know, sometimes I really like to get in really close and get sort of an artistic shot of just that motion, you know, I mean, just the action of a bear eating. And this is another one. Now, this is a recent shot I got that I really like. Mostly, I think I just love the bear. He's calm, calm. And the other great thing about when bears are fishing is there's so much texture in the fur. You know, wet bear fur is just got so much beautiful texture. So that's why I decided to do this black and white. Now I'm gonna just do a little hint on the photo processing and talk about that a little bit more. Now remember, this is a 45 or 1 hour presentation. You know, when a NatHab photo tour leader is guiding a trip, they have an entire, say, a week in order to work on this. So it's trying to cram a lot in. But just to kind of show you an example. So I use Lightroom. That's what I highly suggest. A lot of people don't like the fact that a person has to pay $10 a month for it. But if you're serious, it's very important because, like, when I bought my new camera a couple years ago, well, I hadn't even used it, and I just went to Borneo and I was shooting it, and then I wanted to start messing with my pictures. Well, the old Lightroom program that I had that wasn't updated didn't even read these new kinds of raw files, and so I couldn't do anything. So I went ahead and subscribed to it, and then it was able to update it. And so, yeah, I mean, there's just so many updates that happen now because the technology with cameras or any electronics is happening so fast, you just can't keep up. So it's really not a bad deal. But I wanted to kind of show you. So this is the original picture. It's a raw file, so doesn't look that sharp. It's not perfect, but I'm not going to do too much with it. But I'll just show you how fast. Now, I don't like to play with hundreds of pictures for hours and hours and hours at a time each. I want to get things done quick, and I'll just show you a couple of shortcuts in Lightroom. This is all I really do. Basically, I go to develop settings, and I go down here to auto settings, and there's algorithms that are based upon other photographers that have submitted their feedback on settings of what most photographers would go ahead. And so it shortcuts all these steps, and I just go auto settings. And then it went ahead and automatically did stuff that I could do myself, but why waste the time? Just let that happen. And then I can still go back and adjust it more if I don't think that I like that. I wanted something a bit different. Say maybe I want to change the white balance, which is the temperature of the picture. Do I want to make it warmer? Do I want to make it cooler? Kendall, is this coming out okay? As far as
yeah,
the speed of is there a delay or anything? Is it making sense? Okay.
Yeah, looks good.
All right, and then you've got these little controls down here. This is what it has adjusted. Exposure, it was a well-exposed picture, so it didn't do very much. All that it really did was brighten some shadows up. So I get more detail in the darker portions, and you can see it's really interesting. And what I tell people is to get it, and rather than worry too much about how to use it, just get it and then practice and play with it, and you'll teach yourself in an afternoon. Oh, and then you can watch that histogram, and you can really get to know a histogram. When somebody tries to explain a histogram to somebody else, it can be complicated and and all this stuff. But when you actually do it yourself and you see these things happening real time as your histogram changes over here, as you make these adjustments, it all starts making sense. So just get the program, start playing with it, and you'll learn. It's not great really to show up on a trip where you don't know a lot of the basics, because you end up spending too much time trying to learn. Now, every photo tour leader will teach you, but you'll get more out of the trip if you already kind of have learned some of this yourself. Now, what I will, now you'll notice it hasn't done much to these guys. This is texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrance, and saturation. So often I will play with these a little bit, and they all do a little bit different stuff, and they're just a mixture of different settings, like a cocktail of something to add texture to your picture, to add clarity, which is a mixture of noise reduction and sharpness. Now, dehaze is a new one that's pretty amazing, and it does several different things. And so as you can see as I dehaze the picture, it kind of adds contrast, takes away the noise, makes it a crisper picture. But you don't want to go too far, because if you go too far, I usually just go into the teens with these guys. If you go too far, your picture will look over edited, and a lot of people don't like that, especially saturation. That it really messes the colors up. So it may look good in the beginning, like wow, but other people will look at that picture and say, these kind of cheated a lot. So these are just small things that you can do, and then usually that's about it, and it doesn't take very long. And then if I needed to, I can sharpen it a little bit more, but I don't think I need to. And I can also reduce noise. Now, I shot 2000 ISO. Now with my camera, I get no noise. There's no reason to reduce the noise. Noise reduction is really good now, but when you do it, you will soften the picture a little bit. So you don't want to just over noise reduce the picture any more than you have to. Okay, so that's just like a really quick. And then the other thing I can do if I wanted to is I can crop very easily. So let's say I wanted to get really tight in there and get an artistic shot like that, but I don't want to on here. Okay, but this is another really cool thing, and so people, I remember when I first started taking pictures, when I did black and white photography, when you had to commit to black and white, you had to buy black and white film. Well, this is as easy as it is now. All I have to do is just say, I think I want to try black and white. Boom, it's done. It's black and white. And so then you can start to adjust a little bit different. So what you want in black and white is you want more contrast. So really what you're doing is you just want to accentuate the lights and the darks. More contrast, and then you can look at the shadows. Maybe you can, again, basically contrast is just the difference between the highlights and the darks. You want to darken the blacks a bit just to get that contrast out more. You can sharpen it some more, just to almost make it a little bit more of a metallic look. And then if you want a closer look, you can crop in and see really what it looks like close up. So, I mean, that's just kind of it. That's just a little teaser of probably what should be a much more in-depth webinar. But okay, but you could do Lightroom for hours and hours and hours and hours, but we're not going to do that today. Just wanted a little bit. Another aspect of making sure that your pictures are the best they can be is really for trips like this, it's the guide's job to put the group somewhere that mostly does not get in the way of the bears. You don't want to affect them at all. But if possible, you want to be on eye level. So oftentimes if I'm shooting, I would like to be on my belly even. But you want the bear to be straight eye level. So that's perspective. It's much, much more dramatic of a picture than if you were up in a platform. But you got to be where you got to be based on where the guide says it's okay. And then capturing that motion, again, of this stage of the behavior is a bear with a fish. And a lot of times bears don't like to get their ears wet. So, but of course, when they fish, they will. As soon as they get their ears wet, they immediately shake. And that's pretty impressive when you get the water droplets again, if your shutter speed's fast enough. And if you're really lucky, you can even get some of the salmon roe spraying out. Eye contact. If the bear can look back at you, not that you would ever want to encourage the bear to make eye contact with you. You don't want to yell at it, hey bear, you know, there's not, all that stuff is totally no. But if the bear does look at you, you want to be ready, because when you make eye contact with the photographer, as they're always looking around anyway, that's going to make it really cool. Now, this is something I think will be a theme in one of my future webinars. This one is bear behavior, and eating. But it's really when I'm guiding, one of my sort of mantras that I tell the people is what's in the background of the picture, what makes up the rest of the frame from the subject, is just as important as the subject. So right now, the subject, of course, is the bear with the fish. And you even, luckily, at a fast shutter speed, you even got some of blood droplets. This was an old camera, the quality is not great. But the reason it's that I like it so much is that I've got a bear in the background. And if you can get something like another bear or whatever it is, it can be a lot of things that make the background really, really unique and special. Having another bear in the background is as good as it gets. So just always be paying attention to what is in the background. And that's where your knowledge of depth of field is going to come in. If I shot this at f8, if I had shot it at f4, that bear would be non-recognizable as a bear. It would blur it out even more. If I shot it at f10, the shutter speed would be lower, so I may not be fast enough to catch those drops of blood, but the bear would be even more recognizable. If I could get away with it and go back and do it again, I would have boosted my aperture up to a higher number to make that bear a little bit more recognizable as a bear, because I think that's what really makes this image special. There's a couple more recent images I got, and I like this because, you know, you just got the eyes, and the eyes are very well lit up. You just got that intense look, and then of course the blood is a little gory, but you know, with bears, it is what it's all about. Look at the wet fur. And what I like about this picture, this is a silver salmon or coho. Actually, when you want to get the best pictures, actually the appearance of the salmon makes a big difference. And so you get a big, beautiful salmon versus maybe kind of a rotten spawned out salmon. It'll make a big difference. This is a big, beautiful silver salmon. And this is the bear that was waiting in the beginning of the webinar, but now he's got his fish, and the sun has come up now, and so I do get a bit of rim light along the bear there. It's called rim light, where it just lights up the edges of the bear. And I've always liked this one. This is a big, healthy, beautiful, bright, giant chum salmon. And if you're really lucky, you'll be in a place where the salmon can be almost like kamikazes, and they will do a daredevil rush up into the spawning grounds, regardless of whatever. If the rocks or shallow water or whatever, sometimes the salmon are so crazy that even tiny cubs can catch their own fish for the first time. So these are real trophies. This is a pink salmon. It's an interesting looking salmon. This is a male because it's got this big hump, which is also why they're called humpies, pink or humpy salmon, and the spots on the tail. So this is an interesting looking salmon. It's not the most beautiful of the salmon, but. And again, I think when I do my webinar in the future on what's in the background, I think I'll go over more on how to properly photograph. I did a blog post about how to properly photograph sunrises and sunsets, and using sort of silhouette to make it a moody picture. Okay, yeah. All right, so that's salmon, but I want to go over capturing. One of the special things about especially these coastal bears is how many different food sources, not just salmon, that they utilize, and that's a big story that I love about these coastal bears. And so what those bears are doing right there, and it looks like they're just standing in the water. I'm sorry to switch back and forth, but what they're standing in the water, but actually what those guys are doing this is so cool, because years ago the bears didn't do that so much, but they've learned how to do it. They are basically slowly walking very, very softly along the bottom, hoping to step on a flounder that is basically buried just under the top of the sand, that are waiting for minnows. They're cryptic and hiding, waiting for small fish to come by. And it's turbulent water, and those flounder, a lot of times if you walk slowly, you will step on a flounder. And I've actually done it many times when I'm walking out through the intertidal. But a bear figures that out, and then they realize they can just zigzag back and forth in these areas where the flounders are hanging out, and can actually just, as soon as they feel it, they put pressure down and catch a flounder. And these flounder will swim upstream. And this is one of my recent pictures that is my favorites, of this flounder that had swam up a river, and the tide went out and it got stranded in the gravel, and this spring cub caught its first fish. That was an amazing moment, and took it off, and he was very proud. This is the first fish this little cub has ever caught all by himself. So yeah, I love to document these wide-ranging foods. And flounder is such a unique thing. I mean, whenever I get an image of a bear with a flounder in its mouth, it's just so unique. It just surprises people. And people wonder, what is that? How do you do it? And so I think that's a really cool thing. Flounder stomping bears. I did a whole blog post article about it a few weeks ago. This is nothing like eating a salmon calorie-wise for the bears, but if the salmon aren't there, then they definitely will go for the flounder. Or you may get something incredible, like in 2015, we had a huge fin whale wash up that had died. Unfortunately, it died because the waters are warming in the Pacific, and there was an algae bloom, and about 35 whales washed up. But if the whale was going to wash up somewhere, luckily for us, it was, and for the bears, it was here. To document that was pretty amazing. Again, here, you'll just notice this bear has gotten a little bit of whale meat, and a lot of times brown bears can't grip like a panda. So lifting it up on its top of its paw, and what made this picture special was having another bear in the background. So always pay attention to that. If you can get a wolf in there, it's kind of cool too. But yeah, this marine mammal blubber is just amazing resource. It's marine mammal fat per unit is much more calorically nutritious and fatty than normal fat, because it's used as an insulator. So there's more blood vessels and higher lipid content in the blubber. And I love to get a congregation of bears together because it shows that the bears can be social. I mean, like I said, they're very, very competitive. However, if the bears are smart enough, why fight if there's enough food for everybody? And there's tons of food. So it's better just to mellow out, be friends, and to be able to document that evolved social behavior and ability to get along, you know, amidst many other bears in close contact. I mean, if there was just one salmon spot or one fish, these bears would fight almost to the death. But they're smart enough. It's a whale. Let's all have a feast together. And then all the other creatures that they feed on before the tide comes, before the salmon run starts, such as this mother teaching the babies flipping rocks over in order to get small, very small eel-like fish called blemmy eels that are hide out under the rocks at low tide. And some of these rocks can have 10 of them. Also getting the different snails and different sand fleas and whatever else. So this rock flipping is a really unique behavior that I really try to make sure that if it's possible and at the right time, that my folks on the trip can appreciate and document. Because it really is what makes these bears special, is they're so industrious to utilize lots of different food sources, more than just the salmon, which they're so famous for. Also, this is probably the most famous behavior of the unique behaviors, is the clam digging bears of the Katmai coast. And the clams will start out at about 7 inches below the surface. Now, bears can see the breathing hole of a clam and can smell if it's active or not, and they can dig fast enough. A human could never dig fast enough, but bears can do it with their claws, and they can detect which direction the clam is escaping. And so to be able to document this, also get offshore a little bit at a really low tide, so you can have the mountains make up the background of the picture, which really shows this awesome wilderness. And the baby's learning how to dig clams for mom, which is a very difficult skill, but it's something that they teach them, and it's just a very high fat, high cholesterol food source that's available before the salmon begin to come in. There's some of my favorite clam digging shots. And so each one of those holes is where they've dug a clam. And sometimes the babies just like to ride on mom. Oh, there's another flounder shot. That was misplaced. But yeah, here's another cool picture of a bear taking a flounder out. But I'm going to show you, wouldn't it be a shame if I had taken it like that? So be really mindful of what's in the background. That picture where I've cut that bear, the face off, and I just cropped that to show as an example. But, you know, that the bear in the background really makes an already special picture very, very special. So just keep mindful of what's in the background. Again, you see that bear is in the lower right-hand corner because she is moving from the right to the left. So moving into the rest of the frame. And I just wanted to just throw this picture in there. One of the other things about it, this, again, your guide's job, but there may be people out there that want to photograph this kind of stuff by themselves. But the real secret to me of being able to capture these moments is to make the bears feel comfortable with you, and also to keep the bears healthy and happy and like you never get in their way. So what these females do is they run these ridges of sandbars, and you can see all the clam holes that she's dug. So she works it up like a lane. Well, I would rather have my group sit on dry sand, but I don't want to get in the way of these bears, and so I would sit somewhere where I know clams aren't going to be. So that's the ethics of this kind of stuff. And you'll also notice we're sitting down on buckets, and the fact that we are walking and then we sit down where the bear is 200 yards away, but I can tell which direction the bear is coming. If we go ahead and settle down in an area, especially an area that bear is not going to want to use because there's no clams in that kind of wet mud, then that bear will feel comfortable enough that after she's dug clams in front of us, that she lays down, and then you get the real money shots. And it's because we're behaving the right way, ethical, and just the same thing here. This bear was 150 yards away, and we sat down on this log and waited. And we waited about 45 minutes, and because we were sitting and we didn't disturb her or bother her and the cubs, and these cubs are only out of the den for, I mean, we're one of the first groups of people these little tiny cubs I've ever seen, eventually are right up at us, and that's just because of our behavior. So to get the bear behavior, you have to have the right behavior. And again, that's would be the guide's job to know this stuff. And this is another behavior to document is the coastal sedges. So these are sedges, and they graze on them before the salmon come in. And it seems like it would be boring compared to bears going for salmon, but I actually prefer this time of year because I just love to have these bears that are mellow and socializing together in these intimate moments with mothers and cubs as they're utilizing this very, very special, unique food source, which are coastal sedge meadows at the mouths of the rivers. So all this placed with the short sedges, the real short stuff that they're grazing on, very nutritious, very, very nutritious. It's all flooded over at high tide, and that is why only the sedges instead of the normal, less digestible grasses can grow. So having these bears congregate in these meadows is a magical experience to document. And there's some rim light you see, and you can even see so I intentionally put our group so that the sun was setting in front of us so that we could get that rim light, that gorgeous rim light to accentuate the texture of the fur and even hit some of the gnats. Those are gnats. And I just thought this was kind of, I mean, I just think that the sedge meadow, I mean, I've heard people say, oh, I mean, the bears are just grazing like bison, but to me, it's beautiful. These sedges are such a miracle, provide this food source. I'm going to throw a couple other bears in there for you. Now, if you were to go on a summer trip in, say, Svalbard or something, you're going to be able to hopefully have a much higher chance than we do in Churchill, Manitoba of seeing polar bears eat. Because in Churchill, the polar bears are basically, we've done webinars about the whole story, but they're waiting for the ice to freeze. But to me, that's, you know, this bear, once the ice is there and we're in Churchill, I like to photograph something like this. It's showing that the very beginning behavior, which is that search for food, that patience. That bear hasn't had very many seals or since, say, the ice went out in July, and they're just waiting, and with the patience and the toughness. Now, several years ago, the ice froze up pretty early, and we went out in helicopters, and these bears were actively hunting seals at basically little leads in the ice or little open spots where they knew that seals would come up and breathe, and just waiting, camouflaged in a perfect ambush stance, can wait there for days. They have that kind of patience. You can see strategically behind this little knoll of ice, and so when that seal comes up and starts to get relaxed, boom, you've got a polar bear making a kill, such as this one here. And that's, yeah, and one time we did have a bear get a seal offshore and drag it over to where we were watching them on the beach, and I was able to get again, this quest for food of the polar bears, and then my two favorite birds, or two of my favorite birds, ravens, getting this early season meal of blubber. Now, just a little photo tip. Now, when you're shooting white on white, it's really, really important for you to overexpose. So your camera kind of meters so that everything is sort of a neutral gray. And so when the camera picks up too much white, the camera's sensor basically assumes that you're overexposed. So it automatically wants to help you out by darkening it down. The camera doesn't understand that you're shooting snow. Snow, you want the snow to be bright white. So you have to override your camera's basically the way it's set up to meter on the light. And so you use exposure compensation. So this is just not a bear, but it's just a good example of how your camera would if you were on 0 exposure comp versus plus 2/3. See how the white turns out brighter? And this is kind of what exposure compensation does, is it adjusts your histogram. Either moves everything over to the left, darken things, or if you go plus, it moves everything to the right. I mean, we're just whipping through. Okay, so pandas, the quest for food, I think is really special. Now, these pandas are all in these sort of beautiful breeding centers where the Chinese government is set up to bolster their numbers, to save the species from what almost nearly went extinct in the 1980s. And one of the reasons why the pandas are so vulnerable, and again, this is a totally separate webinar of its own, is their ability as a carnivore to survive on a vegan diet, very low quality. So it would be like if I said, okay, guys, I want you guys to sustain yourselves as humans, but all you can eat are celery, iceberg lettuce, and maybe Brussels sprouts. That's about what it. So you could do it. You just have to eat tons of it in order to get enough calories. Now, this image here of these pandas eating, I love it because it pretty much, I'd spent 2 or 3 hours by myself. I was alone, I wasn't guiding, to try to capture this, and I knew what I wanted. It's not difficult to get a picture of a pandas eating bamboo. How do you spice it up and make it special? How about just wait until you can get an opportunity to put another panda in the background. This picture compositionally has symmetry because you've got 2 pandas that are doing the same thing. And I filled the background up with something pretty amazing. It's almost like a reverse mirror image. And the other very important thing about pandas photography is you gotta, if you can, get some color in the eyes, some light. The other thing that I think is fantastic when I'm guiding these trips in China, I say, I explain to my folks the evolution of the pseudo thumb, which is basically, it's just an extension of the wrist bone, but it acts like another digit. And then it orders pandas, unlike other bears, to grip bamboo. Otherwise, they'd never be able to, if they didn't have this capacity to be able to pick up a bamboo stalk, they'd never be able to make a living eating bamboo. So in order to photograph the pseudo thumb is truly amazing. So anytime you have a chance, I always say, just zoom in really close just to that paw, show that pseudo thumb, because that's one of the miracles of evolution. It turned a carnivore into, it's what allows a carnivore to become basically low quality vegan diet. And they'd love to eat, and they'll eat 50 to 80 pounds of bamboo per day, and they're just masters at it. So basically they're set up to eat bamboo all day long, well, 50% of the time, and then sleep the rest. So just to get a picture of the panda just loving this bamboo, which is something that me or you would not want to munch on. So yeah, the calories are there, but they have to eat tons of it, and it's really tough stuff. So they have to really use their strong jaws and ability to quickly pick up and eat this bamboo. So this is cataloging this quest for food for pandas. And I'm running out of time as usual. Just a hint on pandas. And so usually I will use, you know, meter, normally taking images, I'll meter on the whole frame. And it basically takes an average of the lights and darks. And it's called evaluative metering is when you do this. And for a panda, it's perfect because a panda is 50% white, 50% dark. You evaluative meter, it will basically take an average of the panda and you'll come out just right. The times I've seen people drive themselves crazy is when they use spot metering, which I'll talk about in 1 second. So here's a sun bear. So the quest for food for a sun bear, they're arboreal, and they have the, you know, you're documenting the tools. The tools that sun bears use are these tremendously long claws for digging into termite nests, ant nests. These claws are used to climb trees far, far up in the canopy, hundreds of feet up. And when it gets honey, this super, super long tongue in order to extract honey from these bee nests in the canopy. So if you can ever in Borneo at the sun bear rehabilitation center, which is a jungle area with sun bears that are learning how to be wild again, you just, the huge trophy shot would be one that gets the claws and the tongue. But you know, the thing I love about sun bears is just their pound for pound toughness, their ability to rip through trees to get to the inner bark with these tremendously strong jaws. So anytime you can ever, this very small, maybe 100-pound bear in the tropics, that's so cute, but to really kind of show its ferocity, anytime you can ever get the teeth and that kind of stuff, going after fruit, which is really, you know, its mainstay. Also eats insects, but fruit really is what gets it going. You can ever get them doing this and shows a super unique bear in the forest. Now, when I'm shooting sun bears, I like to spot meter because the sun bear is mostly uniform color. And the thing about the tropics is at low light, sunset or sunrise, there's no sun because you're in the forest. The only time you get any light is when it's overhead. And so there's going to be a huge contrast between shadows areas and super bright. So as that bear's moving along in the forest, as long as you're metering on just the spot of the bear, it will work out okay. The evaluative metering in the rainforest can be very difficult. Okay, so that was just sort of an example. Hopefully it was entertaining and folks learned some stuff, but I just flew through tons and tons of different subjects. But I'm very proud that I was one of the guides that's going to be chosen to lead the Photo Pro expeditions, which is a new program, and it's already up on the web. So nathab.com and Photo Pro expeditions. So yeah, and so basically we've always done photo trips for many years, but this is just bumping it up, and it's going to be similar style to as I just did this presentation, where the folks already know the basics. I'll just say, hey guys, plus 2/3 on that white on white, or spot meter on this one, and they already know. So it's just about putting together the clients into groups of skilled with the same skill levels. And then we also have, as you'll see, basically it's going to be a bit different. We're just going to spend maybe, you know, exclusive access and more time in the field if possible, and traveling even smaller groups, and also things like with vehicles and airplanes, you have more weight allowance. So, and we're going to be doing daily workshops. And so like if I do a normal NatHab trip, non-photo trip, and I spend a lot of my time talking about all the stuff that I just talked about, like these details and techniques and numbers and AV and this and that, non-photographer clients won't like it. They'd rather me be talking more about history or nature or whatever. So, you know, you have to line up the trip. You'll enjoy the trip more if you pick the right style of trip. So this is we're just adding to our list of different styles. And one of the ones that's going to be running here soon is one that I'll be guiding, which is the Grizzlies of Katmai Photo Pro Expedition. So next week on Tuesday, I'm going to join with Court Whelan and Colby and Drew. I think that was it. And we're going to introduce this program. So you want to tune in for Tuesday. And then on the next day, I'm going to do another webinar similar to this one, except instead of the quest for food for bear photography, it's going to be photographing moms and cubs. If you want to get more like this, you can follow my Instagram, look at my pictures at Brad Joseph's Photos, and also have a blog for NatHab. And like this was one of my blog posts recently, was capturing moms and cubs part 2. So anyway, so that's alaskabearsandwolves.com. There we go. Kendall, I think that's it for me. Sorry I bumped up against the hour, but we still have time for questions. I think looks like most people hung on there.
Yeah, absolutely. They want to hear what you have to say still. So we do have some good questions for you, and I just want to remind everyone who's watching, if you have a question for Brad, you can submit those in your control panel under the questions field. All right, so a lot of people want to know what camera setup you're currently using, and what specifically do you use when you're photographing the bears in Alaska?
So recently, the last 2 years, it's a Sony A9, about a 2-year-old version, 100 to 400 lens, 4.5 to 6.3 aperture, and a 16 to 35 2.8 for big wides and landscapes, or really super up close stuff. Fantastic lenses. But my most recent is an awesome lens, and that's what I got most of my really better ones that I showed you. Like is the 200 to 600 Sony. So that's not a cheap outfit, but before, half the pictures that I showed today was taken with a Canon 7D, and either my 70 to 200 2.8, amazing lens, love it, or 100 to 400. No, fixed 300 lens.
All right, great.
F4.
So we've got some people who are more on the novice side of photography, and so I'm going to combine a couple questions from these folks. One person wants to move from a point and shoot to a better camera and wants recommendations from you. And also, what's a good lens for a novice photographer to have on hand when photographing bears?
I think for a novice, I think right now it's probably really worth the money to bump up to the mirrorless camera system. You get twice the camera for half the size. And I can't even tell you how, like I said before, it's like going from an iPhone 1 to an iPhone 12. As far as the old DSLR version stuff up to the newer mirrorless lenses. And there's so many different companies. It really is based on your budget. Now I've just read through the reviews. I chose the Sony. Sony was the first to come out with the best stuff. They had the best native lenses that were for the camera itself, and so that's why I chose that. But I mean, my outfit is well over $10,000 for all that stuff. So that may not be really what people are wanting to do as a novice. But just as a novice, make sure that you are going to be able to upgrade and expand, because as you get more into photography, you're going to want more gear. And I think that a lens for shooting bears, I think that a zoom lens is good, and I think like a 100 to 400. Pretty much all the cameras, the DSLR, mirrorless, there's an option for a 100 to 400 lens. I think that's a great way to start for wildlife. And it's always good to have a wide angle for sceneries, but I mean, if bears are what you want, 100 to 400 is excellent.
Okay, perfect. And can you recommend a mirrorless with VR?
They all have it. Vibration reduction. They're all going to have that. And like my A9, and I'm not really a huge. I've got my gear. I know how to use it. I master it. Then I don't think about it until I decide I need to upgrade, and then I start doing the research on the top models. Just come. But the technology is so fast. But you know, like my camera, the most amazing thing, one of the most incredible things about this camera is that it's got vibration reduction, not only in the lens, but also in the camera itself. So I can shoot things handheld at a 60th of a second that my old camera outfit could never be able to keep steady enough to get a sharp picture. So yeah, the vibration reduction on these newer cameras is just unbelievable compared to the old days.
All right. So we've got some questions regarding, Alaska and wildlife in general. So I'm going to throw those out to you. So someone noticed that in one or two of your photos, the guests are wearing mosquito nets. What time of year are those needed?
Anytime during the summer, but we don't have insect problems like other parts of Alaska do. You're going to be definitely less problems than you would in the Arctic or Denali or the interior, because we have lots of wind and there's just lots of salt water. But there are times where everywhere in Alaska is going to have insect issues. But those nets basically are absolutely, they get rid of it. I would rather have, yeah, it's just something that you get used to. But like out here on this picture that I'm showing here, when we're out anywhere out in the flats or by the rivers and stuff like that, most of the time there's no problem. Anytime there's any kind of breeze, I think some of those shots that that I showed you were like early morning when it was still, and people put the nets on and they forget they even have them on and they just leave them on even though they don't even need them. But yeah, just like with rainy, windy, cool or cold weather, gnats are something that come along with the territory in Alaska. Okay, and mosquitoes.
Great. So a couple people were curious about whether the algae blooms from the dead whales affect the bears at all when they're eating carcasses.
It's not known that they do. That was a huge question, and there was no reports or any kind of findings that did bother them at all. That's a great question.
And when bears are eating fish like flounder and salmon, do they eat the entire fish or only parts of them?
That's a great question. Yeah, so depends on how hungry they are and how many fish are out there. Now with flounder, their skull is so tough that they never eat the skull. It's just like a rock and there's just nothing in there. So they'll just eat the meat off. Now when you come to salmon have a pretty soft skull, easy for a bear to chew up, but it also has the highest portion of fat. So if a bear has lots of salmon, what they want to do is eat the highest fat portions and not waste time digesting anything but the fattiest. So they would rather chew the head, rip the skin off, which has got lots of fat, and then if there's salmon roe, that's the big one that they love. But if there's just a few salmon, then they'll eat everything, every bone, and they'll even lick the blood off the sand. But if there's tons of salmon, they'll do skin, brains, roe if available, if it's a female, drop it, let younger bears or other eagles and stuff like that get the rest, and then they'll go after a new fish.
And how many fish does the average bear eat in a day?
Well, that's a awesome question. It's complicated because it depends on. So some of those pictures I showed you where you had the big, beautiful salmon that have just come right out of the ocean and they're bright. They're called bright. They haven't turned dark. Well, they're going to have 80% more fat content than a salmon that it's already spawned and is just kind of like getting ready to die. So it really depends on and some salmon are 18 or 20 pounds, some salmon are 2 pounds. But I remember, so I think there was about, let's see, I'm going to guess the average salmon was 8 pounds, but I watched a huge male eat 14 of them in a row before, with just stopping only to defecate, make room for more, which they do very quickly, but maybe in an hour period of time, just pounded him down until he just passed out, went to sleep, woke up and did it again. So like, wow. and he was eating the whole thing. So, whatever 8 times 12 is.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a few more camera related questions for you here. So for images of like a close-up of a bear that fill the frame, what's the argument for using a single focus point on the eyes as opposed to a center weighted or matrix focus?
Well, yeah, but the way you want to make sure the eyes are in focus. That way, even if a little bit, because sort of those weighted ones, they will take an average. But what's most important is that the eyes are in focus. Then depends on how far away the bear is from you and all this, and what's your depth of field. Like, I mean, are you talking about f2.8, where you only have a few inches of depth that's going to be in focus, versus an f8 or 10, where you're going to have several feet? So, but I'm always on single point focus, regardless, as maybe the bear's far away, just keep it as close to the eyes as possible. And if you want to make sure more of say it's a bear family, or you're very close and you want the whole face in the frame, make sure that all you care about is that you're focusing on the eyes, and then let your increased depth of field do the rest in order to get the rest of the bear in focus. So if you've got a bear 10 feet or 12 feet away from you looking at you, get the eyes. But if you're at 2.8, maybe the ears are not going to be in focus, or even the nose that's in front of the eyes. But if you're at f8, it will. So hopefully that answered the question, but I just always keep it on single point focus.
Great, yeah, thank you. And so final question, do you find that autofocus of the mirrorless cameras are sufficient?
Absolutely superior. So one of the images that I got that I gave to my sister was an image of a puffin in flight. I got incredible puffin in flight shots with my new camera gear that I was never even able to come close to being able to focus fast enough with my old stuff. So the autofocus speed, I mean, so basically they're flying by so fast. I just push the button and just follow it, and then let the camera is fast enough to catch that puffin, lock onto it, and so just superior, like basically every other aspect of the camera. The mirrorless cameras are superior. Right. And a lot of people will hear about, oh, the mirrorless cameras, they have terrible battery life. Some of the lower models and the older models did now, and now my battery life is 10 times better than my old Canon 7D. They fixed that problem. And they also have a battery charger that will do 2 batteries at once, that you can just basically plug the cord into a USB. So I can have an external battery in my backpack. Like, let's say I'm camping, and I could bring 3 power banks and 5 batteries, or I mean, whatever, a few batteries, and I can charge them in the field instead of have to go plug it into a socket. So that's, I mean, you're talking about, I mean, that's one of 50 or 60 aspects that just is, just mind-blowingly improvements.
Oh yeah, that's great. All right, well, thank you so much, Brad. This was fantastic. I'm really looking forward to your next one with mothers and cubs, because cubs are just so photogenic. They're some of my favorite photos to look at. So I appreciate you taking the time today. I'm going to hand it back over to you for closing comments.
Yeah, I just basically just showed the pictures and just talked about, there's just so many different aspects. This is to really do this, any of this kind of photo stuff justice. You either have to pin down one specific subject, which I think may be a little too boring, or you need to come out and spend 6 or 7 days or do a bunch of research. So anyway, hopefully it wasn't too spread across the map with information, and then it was also a bit enjoyable and not too technical.
Absolutely.
So thanks, guys. Yep. Bears.
All right. Well, my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, so we'll have a replay available on our website soon. And with that, I'll conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, guys.